it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to learn methods to transform your life and actively grow into the potential you know is inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. I'm a psychedelic integration and transformation coach, breathwork facilitator, and an enthusiast of personal growth. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn about new methods to bring into your life, give you practices to follow, and share stories from practitioners who are doing the work so that you can feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. My guest today, I'm so honored to welcome Tristan Victor back to the podcast. Tristan is a first-generation Mexican entrepreneur, artist, and ICF certified life coach focused on integration and men's alchemy. He's the founder of STAYRIZEN, a psychedelic integration-focused community offering a network of education, resources, and guides exploring the intersection between psychedelics and personal development. And this is the second time that he's been on the podcast, which is awesome. It's nice to continue the conversation, get a chance to drop a little bit deeper and catch up with him, see what he's been up to over I think it's been about almost a year since we did our first episode. So Tristan, welcome.
Yeah, man. Thank you, brother. It's good to be back. And it's always nice to kind of come back into a space and do some like reflection about what our conversation was last year to what's most alive now, what's been happening. So it's really an honor, man, and happy to be here.
You know, one of the things that sort of kicked off my desire to have another episode was we were both chatting over IG about our microdosing practices. You know, I've been going through a few different cycles, and I know that microdosing is a big part of your coaching program as well, right?
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, microdosing has been kind of like a pillar for my own like personal transformation and like a catalyst to help me have something that's consistent and that I can build like a deeper relationship with, right? Like in opposing to like macrodosing, which for me personally is like nowadays like more rare. I haven't macrodosed in the last year. It's been something where it's a different type of relationship. Where microdosing, I've been more on like a protocol, and it's been something more consistent, and like there's so many different layers to it. You know, I microdose and go to the gym, and like I have these like quantum workouts where I'm just like, oh my god, like they feel like these different activations happening. You know, presence, microdosing, and nature. You know, deepening my relationship to nature, microdosing with my partner. You know, and like noticing the engagement and presence shift and our conversation and dialogue and emotional intelligence and clarity and communication. And so it's like I'm noticing it influence and impact all these different areas of my life. And with that medicine, it's been something that I've also been encouraging and sharing within my coaching programs and within the teachings, and then how others can hopefully build their own relationship in their own way, but have the similar impact in their life. So it's been great, man. And I have noticed a lot more people interested in microdosing and like curious and wanting to get started, and how do I approach it with more intention. So it's definitely, I feel it's been part of the collective energy in searching for these different tools for healing and structure and self-development and whatnot. So
Yeah, you mentioned intention. I think maybe that's a good thing to like dive a little bit more into, because I think that's what we actually started talking about on IG was like the intentional microdosing. And I know before we started recording, you know, you mentioned intentional, you know, working with psychedelics intentionally is like a big part of what you're about and kind of your focus, your vital point. So like for somebody that is interested in microdosing, but maybe has never done it before, can you like explain a little bit more about what you mean about intentional microdosing and what that's meant for your practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing that comes up for me is I was just in the microdosing training session with a client, and I'll use this kind of within proper share for the sake of answering this question. But so this client basically like started a microdosing practice, but didn't really know anything about microdosing, but just received some medicine and was like, "Oh, I heard a couple things about this, and this sounds cool." And then microdosed like every day for about 5 days straight, and then was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm noticing all these feelings in my body. I almost like feel like I want to throw up, but I don't throw up, and I feel kind of like lifted, but like present." And so she was just kind of intuitively just trying to figure it out. And then so when she kind of came to me, she was calling in more intention. And what that looked like was going into a series of questions of like, okay, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you want to work on, work with? What's most present for you? What are the areas in your life that you're experiencing the most challenge or struggle, right? And then so we started to go down more of like a series of questions to bring in more clarity of how can we use this medicine to help support us in integrating different aspects of our life, right? And so for the specific training, it was kind of getting deeper into kind of like money paradigms, and like wealth and like limitations within those areas, and how can we use microdosing to change that relationship, right? And then so with microdosing, right, microdosing is great because it gives us more opportunity to be receptive to new information, right? It works within the BDNF and serotonin 2A, so it gives us the opportunity to not only feel better and feel good, like similar to SSRIs with the serotonin 2A, but also the BDNF gives us the opportunity to kind of rewrite new behavior patterns and rewrite new ways of thinking, new allows different memory and different engagement with how we approach things in our life. So when we take that receptivity and we also start to add in and incorporate intentional practices for what you're specifically working on, for example, like if we're working on money or wealth, practices that we can start engaging in as we microdose is stepping into how we can explore how our relationship to money impacts our relationship to how we navigate, our self-worth, and incorporating practices like writing a love letter to money, personifying money and seeing what the language is that we use it, sitting with nature and seeing, connecting with the abundance around us, right? How we can have these systems of especially within a capitalistic system, and starting to see where the lineage goes in. One good example as well within this conversation is like I was sharing, for me personally, within the realms of microdosing and money and wealth, like getting really clear of like what story that I've been holding on to when it comes to money, with what was reflected to me, like with the dichotomy of my parents offered like a polar experience of what money and what wealth means. Like my dad works 2 jobs. He's a very hard worker. He came from Mexico and became an entrepreneur. Also works at another job and became really good at saving. Really good at saving. Not spending a lot. And so his reflection to me was like, oh, money is something that I need to work really hard for, and money is something that I need to. It's either I make a lot of money or I spend time with family, right? Because my mom was the opposite end, where she would spend a lot of money, but was like experience oriented and like just spending a lot of time with us. But then she got into her own money situation, so had these polar figures representing different things for money, which created a story that was either I have family and connections or I have money and savings. And so seeing how that played out in me, and then microdosing to help bring in more of how that felt in my body and how the story impacted my nervous system and impacting my behaviors around spending and saving, started to create more intention of what I was working with and how I could work with this medicine to create a different relationship with it, and then vice versa into what this client was also experiencing, what I was able to kind of share in my experience. And so all that to say, basically, like it could change dramatically how you approach microdosing when you bring in more intention into asking yourself these questions and getting more clear on why it is you're wanting to microdose, on how it could support you in certain areas in your life, what areas are you most struggling in, and also getting more aware of how it's working within your brain, how it's working within your system, the spirituality behind it, where this medicine comes from, how it could connect you more to your own lineage and your own ancestors, bringing a lot of reverence, bringing a lot of respect as we work with this medicine and engage with it. So, opposed to if someone's just taking a bunch of mushrooms or just microdosing just cause, and not that that's bad, but it could change your experience, so to say the least.
Yeah, it almost seems like you're able to take a few steps back or pull the lens out a little bit more and see a bigger perspective rather than being so involved in the stories and the
Mm-hmm.
sort of patterns or habits that you've had. It just gives you a wider view to start
Right.
to see which direction you want to look a little bit deeper in, like, oh, okay, I'm noticing that. Now let me explore that a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more, or this feels alive. So I'm going to kind of jump into this and really explore this at a deeper level. Whereas
Right.
when you're so close to everything, it's hard to, it's hard to see that perspective. You're so involved in the story
Right.
rather than like being able to
Yeah.
observe it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something that's felt alive to me during my recent microdosing process as well, is like this idea that microdosing as opposed to like a macrodose, it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like you're integrating in real time as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
like having this ceremonial container and then having this really big experience and then having to go and unpack it and continue to like try to figure out, well, what am I going to do with this experience, because sometimes we both know, right? Like during the macrodose experience, like
Mm-hmm.
a lot can happen, a lot can shift. And then you've got
Mm-hmm.
this big sort of thing that you've got to like work on and unpack and figure out how to integrate, as
Yeah.
opposed to like everything with microdosing is kind of happening in real time. It's sort of like
Mm-hmm.
more of a flow.
Yeah. Exactly. I like that you bring that up because oftentimes for me in my microdosing experiences, it's like, they say it's like years of therapy in one session. And at the same time, it's like, oh my gosh, there's all this awareness. What do I do with all of this? And it's like coming back into your daily life. It can feel almost overwhelming, or for me, it's like, where do I even start? That's kind of what led me into integration, where it
Yeah.
started becoming more about less storytelling and more deepening my practice. So instead of like getting more to like my storytelling, like, oh my God, it was this, and I learned this, and oh my gosh, you could probably learn this as much. And it became more of like just deepening my practice and deepening my discipline, deepening my structure, and deepening kind of my everyday life and my integrity to myself, my values, and that overall, for me has taken more time and more consistency, right? Sometimes I like the quote that sometimes integration is just chop wood, carry water. And with microdosing, I feel like it supports that. It supports more of like the remembrance of like, oh yeah, don't forget what I learned in that ceremony. Like I don't have to engage in this toxic behavior, or I don't have to, be okay with this type of self talk. And like when I have started to notice me kind of almost wanting to self sabotage or wanting to go back to previous feelings or behaviors that I'm trying to get away from or evolve from. I feel microdosing kind of gives kind of that remembrance aspect of coming back into frame, coming back into my intention, coming back into who I'm choosing to become and embody. You know.
Yeah, I really like that. That's a good way of putting it, because like the setting up those foundations and like really asking yourself like who do I want to be, and like
Mm-hmm.
what are the things that I want to embody, what are the things that that feel alive to me, as opposed to what are the habits or maybe the patterns that I'm ready to let go of, so
Mm-hmm.
that if you do end up going to that macro experience, you're like almost more open and receptive to
Mm-hmm.
allowing the next level of changes to come in. It's it's a beautiful thing to be able to like do these huge quantum leaps and level
Mm-hmm.
ups, but like we can't always be doing that, right? Because we have to have some
Right.
sort of a home, some sort of a base to
Yeah.
operate from and still live in the world, right? Most of
Yeah.
us have jobs that we're going to, things that we have to integrate into, and like you're saying, like sometimes after that macro experience, you're kind of like, well, what am I doing? and
Right.
it's a little bit more challenging, as opposed to like, oh, the microdosing is helping to support this overall, um, sort of holistic kind of experience where it really
Mm,
is integrated, as opposed to being so like
mm,
juxtaposed to like the mystical ceremony
mm,
space.
100%.
And
Yeah,
you just finished like microdosing hike, right, with a
hmm,
group of men. Is
that's
that
right.
something that you've been doing regularly?
Yes. So we started hiking with more intention and bringing in brotherhood about a few years ago. After I started working with more brotherhood, men's alchemy work. We had an LA group that we were a part of, and we're just kind of keeping the hikes consistent. We started incorporating microdosing to the hikes few months ago to create a safe space for masculine identified relatives to be able to not only reconnect with ancestral medicine, for example, just reconnect with nature, the land, earthing, the elements, fire, wind, water, earth, and come back into learning about the plants and our allies with the nature, sunlight, but also work intentionally with some medicine and have a safe space to do that. So we started bringing in the essence, like a big part of my journey has been like men's work and men's alchemy work, and it's been so important, like to see in my life how much I definitely need support and accountability, how much I value just having like brotherhood, and especially being in like I'm in a committed partnership and we've been together for almost 2 years. Like having all that reflection and having all that feedback and the medicine of like when my partner reflects to me, being able to kind of like have a support system of brotherhood to be able to just talk about it, and be like, bro, like this is, I don't know what to do right now, I don't know how to move through this. Being able to create a brotherhood within also a medicine space where we're also all microdosing, we're all in nature, we're all kind of connecting to that space. And so we have a structure laid out where we do prayer, intention. We just did a collaboration with a nonprofit, Black People Need Psychedelics. And that brought in more of like Tai Chi and more integration circle. And so we had more fundamentals added to it. And it was just really beautiful, man. Like seeing all the brothers come through, and most brothers have experience already with the medicine. So opposed to some previous hikes where some brothers were brand new to microdosing, so there's more time to kind of explain how this works and like what can come up and have more of those types of conversations. But this last hike was so cool because it's like everyone kind of like knew what's up, everyone kind of knew the vibe, like hey, we've worked with the medicine before. So it was more of kind of like this brotherhood, man, like coming into nature and like laughing and talking, but also being in our own space of what we were bringing into the circle. And then we had check-ins, and then we had the Tai Chi flow, and then we had an integration circle, and just being able to see brothers kind of like open up and share about what's most alive in them, and like know it's okay to ask for support and ask for help, and also at the same time like be with the medicine and like have that kind of clarity come through, in just like a almost 4 mile hike, like how we can step into a space with certain things we're carrying, and then by the end of it feel a lot lighter and feel a lot more clear, so we can take that into our everyday life, back to our partners, back to our friends, back into our workspace, back into our association. And so that's been super game changer for me to have kind of a space like that to um, experience with brotherhood. And yeah, man, I mean, we're keeping it going. We're hosting them once a month and hoping to keep growing the brotherhood with some other things we got going on too. But yeah, man.
Yeah, that's great. I've been watching, some of the things that you've been doing over this year. I know you like did a Sacred Sons retreat, right? And just I really appreciate that about, about that about you, in terms of you sharing that, in terms of you supporting men's work, because it's such an important thing. When I hear you talk about your hike and like the environment that you're creating, the container that you're building, it's like, um, it made me think of sort of the opposite of like the way that when I was growing up, sort of like the opposite container, you know, a bunch of young men like basically getting together and sort of engaging in toxic, you know, masculinity, like not really doing anything to grow and to connect, and just sort of trying to be what we thought men were, you know, and taking the example that was around us that really wasn't very positive and really wasn't like that embodied, you know, divine masculine energy. And then, so, you know, to be able to transform that, to be able to create a better, you know, positive example is so important. And it's such a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful thing to see that movement continuing to
Mm-hmm.
grow and, you know, be supported.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that forward, because I feel it's been the most important part of my plant medicine integration work has been looking into what it means for me to be a man and what it means for me to balance my masculine and feminine energies. And that's coming from, like, I've been in partnerships since I was like 13. I started dating and engaging in that and got into long-term relationships. And so I always felt I had like a feminine reflection in my life kind of supporting me in my growth. But what I've noticed is that, especially as men, it can be easy to fall into like the lone wolf paradigm where we just like try to take everything on our own, or at the same time it may be difficult to kind of have relationships that we can trust. Like, it takes, you know, experiences to deepen relationships with other men and other masculine identified relatives to be able to have the safety and be like, yo, I really need help right now, let me give this person a call, or let me send something in this group I'm a part of, or let me ask for help, let me be vulnerable, let me open up. Because at times, right, the traditional programming of men is like to be strong and to just take things on and to just push through and to not ask for help. And if you ask for help, then it's weak or weakness, or if you cry, it's weakness, you know. And I grew up in a household where I grew up with three, you know, women, and so I grew up with a more feminine, dominant energy in my experience. So I was naturally a little more sensitive. I was naturally a little more like emotionally attuned. So I didn't necessarily need to do that unprogramming of, I need to be softer, I need to be more vulnerable, I need to be more sensitive. I actually needed the brotherhood to support me in deepening my masculinity in the world of my discipline, my focus, my, oh, I don't need to let my emotions drown me. Like, oh, I could hold my frame, which is like a term they use of just holding my container of emotion and like work through it and feel it and then let it go. I could ask for help. At the same time, I could be self-reliant. I could count on myself. I could build a strong nervous system. I could regulate myself. I could build the discipline and consistency that's going to help me be able to hold my partner and hold space for her emotions, rather than like making things about myself, because then I'm getting overwhelmed, then my nervous system's shutting down because her nervous system's shutting down. Then I feel like I don't have the capability, then my insecurities come up, and then I feel like, oh man, I can't hold this, and then I'm taking things personal, and then I'm getting upset at myself, I'm being super hard on myself. So the brotherhood and incorporating with the microdosing, the brotherhood and doing the men's work really supported me in confidence and my capability, and knowing that I'm not alone and I don't have to be alone, and that I don't have to carry all this weight of what life just brings to us all the time and what we're experiencing. And I could kind of lean on the group, on the wolf pack, so that with my partner, you know, my partnership, I'm able to kind of shift my patterns. And the microdosing has supported me so much in that, in like the stories of like, wait, no, I don't have to shut down right now. Like my nervous system will get into like a fight or flight, and I would freeze a lot, and like heavy conversations or reflections with my partner. And I hated that. Like, I was, damn, why do I always freeze? I kind of choke up. I don't know what to say, you know? And like, I'm like, I can't talk, you know? My nervous system is literally having a trauma response. And doing the men's work and like the microdosing supported me in shifting the story of when I know I'm noticing I'm kind of shutting down. I'm like communicating in real time. I'm like, hey, I'm noticing I'm kind of shutting down. I need some space from this conversation just to regulate, then I could re-engage in this conversation with you. And or just being able to breathe through it and then slowly speak into what I'm feeling and how I can navigate this with her, or even just it's even showed up with my own family, my own parents, in like heated conversation, triggering conversations, where I'm needing to kind of like step up and like speak forward, and hold boundaries. And so that's, I feel, has been so important, especially if, for the brothers, in my experience, where I felt very just insecure, I felt very incapable, I felt very unworthy, because of all these. It's like I felt like so much was adding up, right? Like at the time, I felt like, man, I was just such a low place with my money, my work, my relationship. I felt like everything was just shattering, and I felt really really low. And I don't know what really catalyzed kind of my healing, my empowerment, was starting to go to these men's circles, starting to microdose more, and starting to kind of like do that transition of getting back, reclaiming my power and reclaiming my ability to make a change, and not get into like, I've tried everything, I don't think things can change, and then starting to get into the self-sabotage rabbit hole of going deeper and deeper, deeper down into my own self-sabotage. So I would say it has dramatically been a huge shift. And like you mentioned, being a part of a group of brothers and masculine identified folks that are willing to kind of hold accountability, hold the space, and do practices that kind of support our healing rather than our wounds, right? A lot of times I reframe toxic masculinity, which is wounded masculinity. It's just these wounds that we don't necessarily know how to heal, or aren't modeled that on how to heal from our parents or our friends, because they're also wounded. And so they're projecting, perpetuating those wounds and practices that numb and or escape. um, and so when we start to heal, we heal those wounds, we start to have a space to heal. And we also have brothers or other men, reflecting what it can look like, and reflecting that there is opportunity for you to change, for you to heal, for you to become a better version of yourself. So that's kind of what's continuously reminding me of the importance of this work, especially nowadays with after COVID. I feel like a lot of us have spent a lot of time alone and or isolated, and perhaps at least for me, realize how much I value community and I need brotherhood, and why it's so important for me, and just kind of being in community with that.
Yeah, it sounds like a really powerful combination, the awareness that you're gaining from your own, your own inner work, your own practice, with microdosing, and just the work that you're doing on yourself, and then going to a community where you're seeing different choices and different options being modeled. So
Mm-hmm.
like it's like you're almost learning boundaries in these two different ways, like internally and externally, with the awareness of it, of how it feels in your body, how it feels to your nervous system when these things come up, when you need to set a boundary, and being able to communicate that. The communication for me is like something that's been a huge learning point of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like I need to have be able to stand in my power and like communicate my needs, and that's not dangerous. Like I'm not going to be abandoned or
Mm-hmm.
unloved because I'm communicating what I need. In fact, it's going to be appreciated, like, oh, thank you for letting me know, what you need so that I can support you, or so that I can give you space.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like it sounds like a really powerful combination that you've been practicing with and going through.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for bringing that forward to communication, right? It's like when I ask people, what's the secret to, people in partnership? Like, what's been the secret of your partnership? Majority, 99% of the time, people say communication. And so it's like, what is that? What does that look like for everyone? What does that look like for yourself? What does that look like in partnership? And it's like this ability to be able to communicate in language what you're feeling, what you need, and expressing what's most alive in you, what's going to support you, and being able to also express boundaries, what's not okay, what is okay, what's going to be supportive, what's not supportive, and like that learning, that refinement. I was like a huge people pleaser. So it's like self-abandonment was like the technique of self-sabotage for me. And it was constantly like, I was seeing it more and more of like, holy shit, like I'm starting to develop resentment for my partner because I keep self-abandoning, because I keep trying to people please and gain her respect and gain her, please her and receive that validation, because I'm perpetuating a pattern that was coming from my dad, because that's what I sought out from my dad. And so now I'm following the same pattern. And now that I'm becoming more aware of it, I can change it. But it started again with the men's work. So seeing my relationship to my dad, and then seeing how that was showing up in my partnership in such a vulnerable and intimate space, and then starting to kind of make a different choice of like, okay, I don't have to, it's okay if she doesn't like my choice. Like, because at the end of the day, it's like if I'm choosing myself, um, people pleasing leaves nobody pleased at the end of the day. And ultimately, it's like respecting myself and my boundaries, what I need, and knowing how to communicate that. That's been such a big growth for me. And that's why I feel microdosing has been such a good combo, because sometimes I forget, I get out of frame, I start to people please again, or when I'm like overwhelmed or I feel exhausted or I'm just not as mindful, I fall into similar patterns. And then so the microdosing has kind of kept me back into my like, hey, don't slip, man, like, keep the consistency.
Right.
And it's okay if you do, right? It's okay if if you do slip, quote unquote, or if you do repeat a pattern, it's totally fine. Have compassion, for yourself. This is the way I speak to myself. At the same time, it's like, remember, you don't have to have those experiences again. You don't have to re-traumatize yourself again or abandon yourself. um, and that's been a huge healing for me, to be able to be very clear and strong in my boundaries, while at the same time being compassionate, right? Where I don't have to necessarily be like a douchebag, where I'm just like, F you, I don't care what you need. This is what I need. But kind of finding a good balance for me, of how I can communicate that to my partner and to the people around me, and be vulnerable in real time of like, hey, this is I feel kind of awkward or tough asking for this, but I need some space, or I need just some time for myself, or I need you to kind of hug me and hold me right now, and it's a continuous learning, man. But it's been very healing for sure.
Yeah, it's that openness, right? Like the microdosing definitely helps with that, where you might go back into those old patterns, like you were saying, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, I'm open. I can see that I have a choice of
Mm-hmm.
reframing this or choosing a different different way of responding. Um, and that openness and communication really just starts to take things to the next level. Like I relate a
Mm-hmm.
lot to your story in terms of feeling very comfortable in like the feminine side of my energy, and
Mm-hmm.
like having vulnerability around that, in terms of like, my dad told me like it's okay to cry, and like it wasn't like,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of model. But then in my relationships with my partners, there's definitely things where I've been shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And just there's been some other things too recently, like not only with my partner, but just with other things that have come up, where ordinarily like I would just keep it inside and try to like white knuckle through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel grateful that I have that awareness of like, oh, here's something where I'm not comfortable, and what my default is, or like what I have the urge to
Mm-hmm.
do, is just keep it inside and like try to manage it internally.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got instead been like, you know what, like I'm just gonna say this real quick, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, like before we get started, I just want to say this, like I feel uncomfortable, or I feel scared, or I feel nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really amazing to like watch how, instead of what I'm afraid is going to happen, right, like that's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
you can't say that, it's not safe,
Yeah.
that it's like actually being received. And oh, okay. And then I'm learning as well, like, oh, okay, cool, this is safe, it's
Mm-hmm.
okay for me to express these things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just such a wonderful reframing and a wonderful like learning
Mm-hmm.
experience, you know.
Yeah.
um One of the things that my partner and I have been practicing over like the last 6 months to a year is authentic relating,
Mm-hmm.
where you know we are really trying to up the communication game. And one of the tools that we use for that is something called an opt-in, where like instead of just me like dumping what I have to say on you, it's like, hey, I need to bring this up. Like, are you feeling regulated? Are you feeling resourced? Are you ready for this? And then it's like even
Mm-hmm.
a double thing, like, well, I need to bring up this thing, you know, like I'm bringing up some feelings that I have, some
Mm-hmm.
insecurities, or I need to bring up like a preference that I need to express to you, or something that I'm
Mm-hmm.
not happy about that you did yesterday, or something like that. And then we have
Mm-hmm.
the option to like say like, no, like, can we talk
Mm-hmm.
about this tomorrow, or can we talk about this later? Like, I don't feel
Mm-hmm.
resourced for that. And
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning, it was really hard for me because it was like, no, like, I want you to take care of my needs right now. Like, I want to talk
Yeah.
about this. But, you know, like what my partner would point out time and again when I would bring that up is like, well, don't you want me to be in the place where I can like actually hold space, where like I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
regulated and resourced and like able to
Mm-hmm.
communicate and like get through this together as a team, you know? Because if I'm not regulated, I'm not resourced, then I'm not really in a place to hold space for you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then like you said, that's where like the resentment starts to grow, or like
Mm-hmm.
you're betraying yourself by just saying like, okay, I'm gonna, you know, deal with this. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that could even lead to like more conflict, because instead of like holding
Mm-hmm.
space and actually listening to each other, it's just the wounded parts like
Yeah.
communicating and butting up
Mm-hmm.
against each other, instead of like an actual like evolved partnership, you
Uh-huh.
know? So
Exactly.
the communication game is like, man, it's such an incredible like thing to go through, you know, especially with a partner that's also doing the
Mm-hmm.
work, and you know, committed to being there with you through that
Mm-hmm.
process.
Yeah, 100%, man. I love that you mentioned like just being having those check-ins and checking in with yourself if you're regulated and well resourced, and what does that even look like? You know, what is it? How do you regulate yourself, and how are you using your resources? That's been important for me to kind of explore, because naturally it's like regulation. You know, how can we regulate our emotional state? You know, and like for me, it's been the use of just taking a walk for sure. You know, and doing some deep breathing for sure. Other time is just us yelling, and like that's how I want to express, because it's just like I'm just frustrated. I need to yell. And also like in the long term, it's been really working with my nervous system with like adaptogens, with functional mushrooms, with different herbs, and like oh wow, and also noticing my own Ayurvedic profile. Like if I was eating a lot of cold foods, and that was keeping me a lot in vata. And so then, eating more warmer foods, feeling more in my body, getting into more of my primal kind of like root. I started incorporating different foods in my diet, so that I could have more of the capacity to regulate in real time, and have more of like kind of my nervous system in check, because that was something where I was like, I was a huge learning for me, because I'm like, man, why am I always so unregulated, and I'm like, damn, I can't regulate myself, and it was because my nervous system was just out of whack. I was just like, my diet wasn't supporting it, I wasn't working with any herbs, and then my emotions were like fluctuating, felt like I was bipolar, and like it was challenging. But then coming back into what does it look like for me to self-regulate, and what resources am I calling upon? For example, like a few times in real time during a discussion, I'm really heated, I'm triggered, I'm like, yo, I need some space, I don't know how to navigate through this, and I'm like, okay, who can I call? Like, how can I regulate myself, and then who can I ask for support in navigating this? So there's been a few times where I've called a brother up, and I'm just like, yo, man, like, this is where I'm at. I don't know what to do. Um, how to approach the situation, and so that I get real time guidance and feedback. It helps me kind of like tune back in, and then I could reapproach the conversation without getting super like in my volatile, like I'm over, like this is it, this is over, where it could lead into kind of just escape, end this, like that's a trauma response, and so being able to know what resources you have and creating the resources, and then creating your practices for self-regulation, and then communicating those with your partner as well, and have them having their own practices so that you can engage from that space. I feel it really makes the evolutionary loving put into practice, which is a journey.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that brought up that, because I feel like that's what we talked about a lot during our first conversation. We were talking about like how to stay in your body. And, I remember
Mm-hmm.
you talking about like gaining this awareness of like, oh, like I've been out of my body. I haven't been connected to my body for most of my life, and you were talking about starting to bring in the Ayurvedic,
Mm-hmm.
eating and awareness. So I'm grateful
Mm-hmm.
that that's continued to evolve and something that you've continued to explore and deepen with. That really sounds like, you have a lot more awareness around it, and just
Mm-hmm.
from doing more work and exploring it more.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Is that something that you incorporate into your microdosing protocol as well?
Yeah, 100%. So there's a term that was coined by my partner called vibrational wellness. And so we talk a lot in the trainings about vibrational wellness techniques, different techniques that you can incorporate into your protocol that can support the wellness of your vibration, right? And a lot of those things are working with herbs. A lot of those things are doing more holistic practices like herbal baths, looking at your Ayurveda and looking at your consistent diet, what you're drinking, what you're eating, what you're consuming, what are the things that are going to support you in the wellness of your vibe. A lot of times it's also hygiene. What products are you using? What chemicals are you being exposed to on a daily basis? How clean is your environment? Looking at times, mold exposure has been something that's been put in my awareness, especially, growing up in an environment that wasn't necessarily so consistently disciplined in cleaning, not knowing, oh shit, mold is a thing that can actually affect me on a daily basis. Looking at kind of different areas that can support us in being in our bodies, movement practices, yoga, sanas, walking, connecting with people, relationship building, community building. And so we definitely look at like a holistic approach of the vibrational wellness techniques that are going to support you in your overall holistic wellness and healing as you microdose. And that also comes into like more of the intention driven practice, rather than just like seeing how it goes, but bringing in more
Right.
intention of like, hey, well, you can see how it goes, and you could also set yourself up for success.
Yeah, like I love that you mentioned the word protocol, because like to me that the protocol and the intention go hand in hand, right? Like you're being more intentional, you're creating a structure so that you're not just, like you said, like let's just see how it goes, and there, I think there's like we're entering into this new age right now, right? Where like these medicines are more available, these energies are more available, and so I think that that's a really important thing to remember, that it's okay to have structure. It's okay to have a protocol, especially if you're like looking to get a specific result
Mm-hmm.
out of your work.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously for clients that you're working with or that I'm working with, like that's why they're coming to us, right? Like it's not like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm just going to work with you and see what happens. Like they're coming to us
Right.
with a specific thing. Like I want to work on this. This is
Mm-hmm.
something I want to change. So to have a system, to have a protocol, um, is definitely like something that I believe in as well.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely wanted to
Mm-hmm.
touch on, the STAYRIZEN protocol that
Mm-hmm.
you have developed, and like learn a little bit more
Yeah.
about that if you're willing to share
Yeah.
that.
Most definitely, man. I get excited because like it's been such a big part of my life, man. It's been like 5, 6 years since I started Stay Risen, and at first that it wasn't a protocol. At first it was a mantra after my bit, my first macro dose of medicine. And it was like I had this huge awakening, and I was like crying, and I was like sobbing, and I was laughing, and it was like a whole cluster of emotions. And I was younger at the time, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much. I was like, I feel so connected. And coming back from that experience, all I remember was like, I just had to remember, like, I was telling myself, don't forget that I access those feelings of joy, and I have access to those emotions. So my number one thing coming out of it was like, I just gotta like remember, and that's where I was holding the mantra to stay risen. I was like, I just have to stay risen, man. Like, I just gotta hold this remembrance. And then throughout the time of growing in, building the community, it eventually I had another, insight and upload of like, oh, this is a protocol, and I laid out 5 different stages of it, and then it became like this whole practice that I started doing on myself, and started going through, and I was like, this is so good, man. And then I started sharing your community, and so the protocol is the Risen Protocol, RIZEN. And to go through it really quickly, the R is for remembrance, the I is for integration, the Z is for Zen, the E is for embodiment, and the N is for normalization. And so it always begins with remembrance, is remembering, right? We've been talking about it through our conversations, right? It's the value of remembering, and coming into remembrance, in such a quantum and multidimensional way of remembering who we are, remembering that we don't have to fall back into old stories, remembering that we have access to healing, remembering who we are in this reality, in this universe. It could get very esoteric as well, remembering our connection to the all, to universe, spirit, God, source, energy, and then taking it down the process, right? So okay, once you remember, you integrate that, and then once you integrate that, you bring it into Zen, and you're with the presence of it, and then you go into the embodiment, the daily practice, and then through that consistency of embodiment, then you normalize a new baseline of consciousness. You normalize a new way of being. You normalize, wow, who I was 90 days ago is a completely different person than who I am now, who I was, a year ago, who I was yesterday. It's through this practice. What I really appreciate about this protocol is that kind of it just points towards action and embodiment, rather than just being in the awareness of things, right? Because awareness is half of the work, right? Awareness of our behaviors, awareness of our actions, awareness of who we are, why we're doing what we're doing. But then the actual putting into practice and deepening and shifting your habits and understanding your day to day and your routine and how you show up, that I feel is really the juice to transformation. And then each kind of like pillar has its own kind of like little practice and protocol. We could go a little deeper if you'd like, but that's kind of like the overview of the Risen
Yeah.
protocol. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love it. Whatever you want to share, brother. I'm open for that.
Cool. Yeah, man, it's
Love
really
to
dope.
give the audience, that
Yeah,
that value as well.
yeah. So it's really cool. This is something that when I just go on my own personal like macro doses, or even just in microdosing, it's not even just working with plant medicine or any type of medicine. It's after coming back from Burning Man, I went to this protocol, because Burning Man was like such a profound experience. It's so much more than a festival. It was like a whole life journey within that week being there. But this protocol can be used for any type of transpersonal, spiritual, religious, psychedelic experience, anything that kind of shifts our state of consciousness. It could be after a Vipassana retreat, it could be after deep meditation. But essentially, it starts with the R, which is remembrance, and remembrance, it falls under awareness. And so it's about deepening our awareness and going to self-realization. And so self-realization is like realizing ourselves, similar to kind of like Yogananda and his teachings of the self-realization fellowship, of just like realizing the self, becoming very aware of who we are as a being, right? What's so cool about remembrance, I feel, is like in all traditions I've kind of been engaging in, there's always this kind of like pointing towards remembering. For example, like in Hinduism, there's like remembering that you're connected, right? There's Brahman and Atman, and so it's like remembering that you're connected to something bigger than you, like the self, essentially, like you're connected to all that's around you. It's like it kind of almost points to like you don't even exist. You're just a concept in the whole. By the same time, even in Mexica traditions, there's a word ometeo, which is a duality of life, that you're all of duality, you're all of reality. And so in like a bigger level, it's like this remembrance of our interconnected nature of all of reality. Then on like a individual level and a practical level, it's a remembrance of these insights that we get from these experiences, from a festival, from from medicine, from whatever brings you to that space of like, oh wow, I don't have to be that version of me anymore. I don't have to fall into that narrative, that script. Like there's this power and awareness of, wow, I'm the one writing my story in this consciousness, in this experience of consciousness and reality. So taking that remembrance, which I feel is happening all the time, and going into integration, which integration, you know, it's like coming back into wholeness. For me personally, like integration for me is like more of like direction. It points to like, oh, okay, what do I do with this awareness? It points into like, what's next? What now? And that's kind of like the self inquiry. And so from awareness, it kind of leads into integration, which is like the self inquiry. You're asking yourself these questions of what do I do now? What changes can I make in my life from this experience? What habits can I incorporate? How can I show up differently in my relationships, in my health, in my spirituality, in my connection to money? With that being said, going into integration, remembrance, integration for me is more about like direction and self inquiry. So traditionally, like integration is looked at as like piecing back in yourself into wholeness, which in its opposing viewpoint talks about fragmentation. Like where in our life are we fragmented? Where in our life are we kind of not fully allowing all of ourselves to be online? And in the Mexican tradition, there's a Spanish word called susto, and it's like translates like fear or being scared. And it talks about how in certain points in our life, things are very traumatic or overwhelming. Our body, our nervous system, our spirit can get susto, can get fright, and can get scared, and that then creates a fragmentation of that part of ourselves stuck in that moment in the past. And so when it comes to integration for me, it's like looking and sitting with what parts of ourselves are fragmented, what parts of ourselves are still stuck in a trauma loop back from years ago, from when you were a child. And it could be very heavy things to just things that, you know, public speaking at school and, you know, forgetting. There's actually a real thing for me of like forgetting my kind of speech at school and then feeling ridiculed and that holding a trauma in my body, and then noticing that come up when I was public speaking moving forward when I was a grown up, and being afraid of the ridicule. So integration for me is like a direction of self-awareness, going to self-inquiry of like, man, asking these questions. So the similar path can go to you of like, what are you going to do from this point on? What practices are you going to incorporate? What practices and habits is going to support you? It gives more direction into what I'm working with and what I can do about it, right? And so, for example, with the stage fright one, it gave me a direction of like, okay, I just got to put myself more in public speaking situations in real time, work with that. And so, setting up a game plan for that. I joined Toastmasters and started doing more public speaking and workshops, and it really healed a lot of those wounds from when I was a kid. So, for me, integration can also be really heady because it's a lot of just like writing down your game plan. It's like it could be a lot of journaling. It could be a lot of asking yourself these questions. It could be a lot of, what am I going to do from this moment on now that I have this awareness of this fragmentation, or now that I have this awareness of this part of me that I want to heal or bring forward. And so integration is kind of that modality that gives us the direction as we are doing the self-inquiry. So with that being said, because it could get kind of heady and could get very kind of like strategy oriented, the next stage naturally leads us into Zen. Zen is all about presence. It's all about kind of this being in the self-awareness of the here and now, right? Like Alan Watts, one of my favorite philosophers, he does such a great way of like explaining Zen to a Western audience, and it's just like a snap of a finger. It's just here and now. It's just being in the state of presence of all that is in what's most alive in you. And so, because you know you've been doing all this integration work, because you've been doing all this strategy work, because you went to the remembrance, it's giving yourself the kind of the spaciousness to just breathe, to just be with it, to be with wow where you're at now in this point in your life, because what you're about to get into is the embodiment, is the actual action based change that's going to make the difference, right? You're going to do the things that you set yourself up to do, right? You're going to start to wake up earlier, maybe get your circadian rhythms back into balance, as you're going to get into kind of like shifting, your diet with more Ayurvedic oriented practices. You're going to shift the communication within your partnership. You're going to actually do it and be consistent and hold a structure. And you might, they say transformation is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But the fact of the matter is that like it leads you into the embodiment, because now you're actually doing the thing, right? For me, it was like actually going and doing the workshop and like doing things more like in front of communities, so that I could actually feel the healing and be in the practice of it. And doing that for a consistent amount of time, you start doing it. You start being it, you start creating it, you start feeling it. It leads into the 5th stage, which is normalization, which is all about your impact, because now your impact is different. Now who you're choosing to show up is different. Now how people perceive you is different, because now you're doing your own work, you're doing your own healing work. Impact is how you're impacting your family, your friends, your kids, your partners, your community, because you're going through this process of remembering and going to the self-awareness and developing integration strategies, and then being with yourself and then doing the actions. It normalizes a new state of consciousness for you. It normalizes a new way of being, a new way of how people can perceive you and receive you. And that for me is the self-actualization that Abraham Maslow talks about in his hierarchy of needs. It's like you go down, you go through the ladder, the triangle, the pyramid, and you reach the space of just actualizing all of yourself, because you're going through the integration. You're seeing where and what parts of you need that attention, that healing. And this is a continual cycle, which is why it's like stay risen. It's like, it's not just a one-time thing, right? Like I sat with that one trip. It's like it's a continuous cycle, man. We're always evolving and transforming. So the staying risen, mindset and mantra and practice and protocol is like meeting yourself where you are now in your life, and then keeping this kind of like perpetuated cycle of growth and transformation. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it is. That's kind of what I guide people through, is each stage, at each process. And that's kind of what's helped me so much, have at least some type of framework and some type of structure to approaching integration and approaching like the work of transformation post medicine, post ceremony, post festival, whatever it is, post breakup, breakthrough. It's given me that kind of like, oh, okay, let's start back with the first stage. Like, what is this teaching me? What am I remembering about myself, and what does that lead me to do? So hopefully, for all of you listening, you could guide yourself through a similar process. You could ask yourself some of those questions and go through each stage, and notice how that can shift the way you work and approach integration. And hopefully it's a protocol that can be very impactful for your life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Tristan. It is very powerful, and just like hearing you explain it, it makes a lot of sense in terms of starting with the awareness, the remembering, and that what do I want to bring in? What's my intention for integration, and then actually bringing that into presence, and being able to take action on it. And I love that you mentioned that that it's a cyclic, it's a continuous process, like a cycle. That normalization leads you back into that remembrance, leads you back into checking in. Okay, like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? Like, okay, what did I normalize? What am I still working on? What's alive to me now because I have taken those 2 steps forward? What am I a resource now to bring in, or what's coming up as a result of the work that I've done? And yeah, it's a beautiful protocol. Appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah, thank you, man.
So if people want to get a hold of you to work with you more, or learn more about this protocol, participate in the mushroom microdosing hikes, or anything else that you're doing, where should they go?
Great question. You can check out the STAYRIZEN community, Stay RIZEN. We're on Instagram. You can follow my personal account as well, which is I am Tristan Victor. IAM Tristan Victor. On Instagram is going to be the best way to kind of send me a message, or find me on Telegram, which would be an even better way to get in contact with me. But those are going to be the main ways, and I'm sure there'll also be a link that people can click and just get more connected with what's going on.
Awesome. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate the opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper and find out what you've been up to. You know, it's so nice to like for me, you know, like to kind of compare our
Mm,
conversation that we had, you know, almost a year ago, and some of the
mm,
things that were alive for you, some of the things
mm,
you were talking about, to the things that you've been obviously, you know, working on through your own protocol and normalizing and exploring
mm,
deeper. And it's just
mm,
a beautiful thing to be able to
mm,
hear you and ask questions, learn more about you, because I
mm,
definitely feel a lot of camaraderie and like you know, resonance with the
mm,
work that you're doing and some of your story, like your experiences, and really
mm.
appreciate you just coming on and being so open and vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, man, and I appreciate the space to share. And yeah, man, thank you for the work that you're doing, the spaces that you're holding, and the people that you're supporting through your work and through your story. Much respect and deep reverence. And yeah, man, I hope to continue to build our friendship and our brotherhood, and continue to support as many people as we can, and keep this movement going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would definitely love, if I'm out in LA, next time I'm out in LA, I'll make sure to check in and see if there's a hike coming up, because that's something I would definitely be into.
Yeah, man, please do.
Very cool. Well, hope you in the audience got something from this conversation. I think there's a lot to take away, a lot to you know, chew on and think about and remember, so that you can start to integrate it into your own practice. And you know, just like Tristan said, you know, it's wonderful to have the awareness and the you know, intention, but you also have to couple that with actually working, actually taking action, and you know, making that into the embodiment and the normalization. So you know, that really fits into the theme of the podcast, that the vital point is to
Mm,
practice, to take action. We can't
mm,
just listen to a podcast and expect our life to change, or read a book and expect our life to change. It's also about taking those action steps. So I hope that
mm,
this conversation inspired you to take that next step, whatever it is, you know, that breathing into it, seeing like, there's, I think we all have that thing that if we get still, we breathe into it, we know that's the next step. And maybe it's a little bit scary, maybe we've been putting it
mm,
off, but when we get still, we can really be honest about what it is. And I hope that this conversation inspires you to take that action, take that next step.
mm,
And so until next time, my friends, keep practicing, because that's the vital point. Thank you.
mm. Aho, tausukumati.